Welcome back to Bad Things in History, where we deliver historical nightmare fuel to your subscription list every Monday. Our effort to explore the worst and least known events of the 1920s continues. It might have been called the Roaring Twenties, but this transitional decade was far too complicated to capture with a simple phrase. Natural disasters were incredibly common. Accidents frequently killed people from all walks of life, and repressive governments were on the rise. In this episode, we will bring the horrible happenings of 1926 into focus. Let's begin with censorship in Ireland. Committee on Evil Literature. When the Irish Civil War ended in 1922, the Irish Free State was created. It chose to sign a treaty with Britain and became part of the British Commonwealth. The Irish Republican Army held part of Northern Ireland and refused to join. Although conflict still existed within Ireland, most of the country was governed by the Irish Free State. A few years after establishing the government, those in charge decided that they needed more power to enact censorship. After independence for the region was established, authorities were under pressure to censor offensive materials. The Minister for Justice, Kevin O'Higgins, thought that existing obscenity laws were good enough, but after years of pressure, he finally relented to demands. On February 12, 1926, he created the Committee on Evil Literature. They were tasked with determining whether the state should be more involved in censorship. The committee consisted of 3 people who were not experts. It also had 2 members of the clergy that were considered experts in determining what was morally corrupting. Before the end of the year, the group would give their findings to Kevin O'Higgins. They would suggest that the state needed more power to restrict offensive materials. The committee said that newspapers needed to be banned because they described violent crimes. Birth control literature must be banned. Pictures of dancers and advertisements for hygiene products were also too offensive for the public to see. Many of their suggestions were passed into law in 1929. Virilla Train Accident. Sometimes charitable acts can be deadly. Professor Francisco Gomez Alizago wanted to help an elderly home in Cartago, Costa Rica. One day, he had an idea for how to raise money. People in nearby areas wanted to visit the statue of La Negrita. Many of the locals thought it had healing powers. The professor decided to help the elderly by selling tickets. Anyone who had a ticket could get on a train and ride it to see the statue. Unfortunately, there was no limit on how many tickets could be sold. On March 14, 1926, a train arrived at Alajuela around 7 a.m. It continued to make stops along the way and picked up more passengers. Eventually, the train was overcrowded. Nobody is sure how many people were on the train, but over 1,000 tickets were sold. The train began to cross a bridge which also had a turn. The rail was poorly maintained. Combined with the extra weight of the train, it caused the track to fail. Several cars fell into the river below. 248 people were killed, including the professor. The bodies of many of those who died were carried back home on the same train. Their families had to identify the deceased in order to receive the remains. Queen Bess. Bessie Coleman was born in Atlanta, Texas on January 26, 1892. Her mother was African American. Her father was half Cherokee and half African American. When she was 9 years old, her father left the family. Despite this hardship, Bessie was able to attend a university when she turned 18 years old. Unfortunately, money ran out at the end of her first year. She had to leave school and return home. Around 1915, Bessie moved to Chicago. While there, she began hearing stories about pilots during World War I. The tales of pilots and their exploits fueled her active imagination. She wanted to learn to fly. Bessie needed money to make this dream come true, so she worked 2 jobs. During the day, she was a manicurist, and at night, she managed a restaurant. Pilot schools in the United States would not accept women or African Americans. Even though she could afford to pay for lessons, Bessie was not allowed to learn how to fly. Instead of accepting defeat, she moved to Paris on November 20th, 1920. On June 15, 1921, Bessie Coleman became the first African American and first Native American to earn an international pilot's license. In September 1921, she returned to Chicago. Earning a living from flying a plane was difficult. Commercial air travel didn't exist. To make ends meet, Bessie would need to learn how to become a stunt pilot. Because of her skin color and because she was a woman, Bessie again couldn't find anyone to teach her. In February 1922, she returned to Europe to find a mentor. She trained with several well-known pilots in France. Bessie became a world-renowned pilot. She returned to the United States and spent the next year performing at air shows. Queen Bess, as the public now knew her, was also a very aggressive pilot. Sometimes she paid the price for her ambition. On February 22, 1923, her plane stalled and then crashed. Bessie broke a leg and 3 ribs. She recovered and continued to fly dangerous stunts. But Bessie had ambitions beyond just flying a plane. She wanted to establish a school to teach women how to fly. Unfortunately, it would never happen. On April 30th, 1926, Bessie was in Jacksonville, Florida. She had recently purchased a Curtiss JN-4. Her mechanic flew the plane from Dallas to Jacksonville, trying to deliver it to Bessie. The airplane was in such poor condition he had to land 3 times to make repairs. Bessie's friends and her close family members didn't think she should fly in this poorly maintained aircraft. But Bessie didn't listen. She wanted to perform a parachute jump the next day. Before jumping from the plane, Bessie needed to get a better look at the terrain, so she decided to take her plane into the air and have a better look. When it took off, Bessie was a passenger. Her mechanic was flying the aircraft. Around 10 minutes into the flight, they were 3,000 feet above the ground. The plane suddenly went into a dive, then began to spin. As it descended to 2,000 feet, Bessie was thrown from the aircraft. She died instantly upon hitting the ground. The plane and her mechanic crashed at full speed. The vehicle burst into flames and exploded a few moments later. Picatinny Arsenal. Before the Civil War, the United States military kept much of its gunpowder and weapons in the eastern part of the country. The majority of these supplies were kept in the south. After the war ended, the military decided that maybe it should store its weapons closer to Washington, D.C. On June 26, 1880, land was purchased near what is today Rockaway Township in New Jersey. By 1907, the Picatinny Arsenal was being used for more than just storage. Munitions were being made on site. A school on the grounds also taught soldiers about the science of military weapons. On June 10, 1926, there was a storm overhead. A flash of lightning emerged from the sky and hit an ammunition warehouse. The warehouse caught fire and the flames quickly spread to other warehouses. Many of them began exploding. The devastation continued for almost 3 days. Several million pounds of explosives were detonated. 19 people were killed and 38 were injured. Homes for a mile around were destroyed. The accident was also extremely costly. The value of the munitions that were lost was equivalent to $1 billion today. Additionally, unexploded shells from the arsenal were thrown in all directions. As recently as 2007, the Army Corps of Engineers had to remove 21 of them from someone's yard. The Great Miami Hurricane. For most of the world, the Great Depression didn't begin until the end of the decade, but for Florida, economic destruction arrived much earlier. In the 1920s, the state of Florida experienced a land boom. People and businesses were moving into the state and buying land as quickly as they could. It was a prosperous time to live in the state. On September 11th, 1926, a cyclone formed in the Atlantic Ocean. It kept growing until it was a Category 4 storm. The hurricane finally reached Miami on September 18th. The storm surge resulted in water flooding into the city and in nearby neighborhoods. Those who could fled to higher ground. Several levees were overwhelmed and failed. The water that drained into the affected neighborhoods drowned hundreds of unsuspecting people. Over 1,000 people were killed, at least 2,000 were injured, and more than 38,000 people became homeless. The storm inflicted around $100 million in damage, which would be the equivalent of $1.5 billion today. The real estate market in Florida crashed, throwing the state's economy into turmoil. Cristero War. The Mexican Revolution was the longest and most bloody conflict in Mexico's history. When it finally ended, the government created the 1917 Constitution. This founding document of the new Mexican government had some very specific restrictions on religion. It required the separation of church and state, but also enacted several restrictions. Churches and their priests had to register with the government. They were not allowed to hold office or speak on behalf of political candidates. In practice, these restrictions were rarely enforced, but over the next decade, new laws would emerge and the result would be chaos. In 1926, Plutarco Elias Calles was president of Mexico. His administration enacted what became known as the Calles Law. It enforced far-reaching limits on what Catholic clergy could do. Wearing clerical clothing in public could result in a fine. A priest who criticized the government could go to jail. Some parts of Mexico went even further and began limiting how many priests could live in an area. President Calles helped enforce these new restrictions by confiscating property from the Catholic Church. He also closed monasteries and religious schools all over Mexico. Catholics all over the country began resisting federal troops. They began waging a guerrilla war against the Mexican government. It continued for almost 3 years. When hostilities ended on June 27, 1929, the conflict had claimed the lives of more than 90,000 people. The Mexican government didn't repeal Calles' law until 1992. In 1926, restrictive governments and natural disasters were in competition with each other. At first, it wasn't clear which of them would accumulate the highest body count. By the end of this troubling year, the answer was no longer in doubt. Hurricanes couldn't compete with humanity when it came to spreading unnecessary death and destruction. What do you think about this violent decade? Are we just biased against your happiness, or was it really that bad? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you see some value in what we do, we would love it if you considered becoming a patron. If not, then how about buying something from our merch store? Consider it a down payment on the nightmares of your future. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History.